Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com. Hey, Joshua, good to see you on the show.
Hey, I'm so excited to have this chat with you. It's so strange because you prep for an interview, you get excited, you put it down in your calendar, and you tell yourself, I'm going to go shower, I'm going to go make a nice strong cup of coffee, and you set everything up, the equipment's all ready. And then the first words, always my first words is I just end up messing up my sentences, my grammar's off, and I'm just like, ah. And actually it just started storming outside, so I hope the sound quality is going to be okay. Yeah.
Well, it's always like that, especially for you who's an experienced radio presenter, podcast host.
Oh,
You think you get everything locked down and things always change last minute.
but I love that though. I tried to be a perfectionist with things, and I've been practicing to just have that wiggle room where life just kind of either completely messes things up or surprises you. Either way, it's always a surprise, right? Which part of Singapore are you at right now?
Central Singapore. So wherever that thunderstorm is, I'm probably going to be hearing it soon as well.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm all the way out in the west, in the Wild West. So I'll send some dark clouds over to you by the end of this conversation.
Well, yeah, I'm sure I'll catch them in a few minutes, I'm sure. So for Joshua, for you, I'm so excited because, you've been a radio presenter, you're a music artist, you're a podcast host, you're a musician, you do lots of interviews with celebrities, all out from Singapore. And you also represent multiple causes that you care about, and especially with the SG Boys, with the representing the LGBTQ community as well. So I'm excited to talk about not only your work, but also your journey personally, as well as how technology has been an enabler for so much that you have been pioneering here in Singapore and Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know you yet, how would you introduce yourself professionally?
See, when you run it down like that, it sounds like, when you're a kid and you hear like the bios of all your favorite superstars and everything, they're like a philanthropist, and you're like, what is a philanthropist? And they're entrepreneurs, and they've got all these really cool titles, and it sounded like that when you were reading me out like that. But the truth is, really, I still feel like a teenager who every step of the way I'm faced with opportunities and decisions to make. I just try to do what makes sense in the moment, and I learn. I'm always learning constantly. I feel like even with all these titles, I'm still a student in all of those areas. But I guess in a nutshell, kind of name card. Hi, I'm Joshua Simon. I just turned 31 a couple of days ago. I'm a radio presenter here in Singapore. I host a podcast called The SG Boys. It's an LGBTQ plus themed podcast. In Singapore, I'm also known for interviews that I've done through the years as well with some really powerful people. I do YouTube. I studied film in film school. Did you hear the thunder? Oh my goodness. And I got this new microphone setup as well. That must be real crisp. I do a little bit of everything. I think growing up as a kid, I wanted this was my dream. I wanted to be involved with whatever I was seeing on TV. I just wanted to go into that screen and in some way be involved. Yeah.
Well, now I can hear the thunder on my side after it coming on your side. Joshua, when it comes to all of this, how did your love for entertainment start? Did you start young, or was it something you discovered along the way?
So a fun little fact, as we're having this chat, I actually have playing through my headphones some classical music, because that's something that I always kind of do in the background. It makes everything more cinematic when you've got like a score playing in the background. My love for entertainment actually came from a huge lack of entertainment or exposure to pop culture. My dad is a pastor of a Bible Presbyterian church, and I was the pastor's son, right? And for a big chunk of my childhood, I only watch movies or listen to music from the church library. So when I was in primary school, kindergarten, when people were talking about like the Spice Girls and the Backstreet Boys, Michael Jackson, Madonna, I did not know who any of these people were. But like a lot of these kind of stories, there is the cool uncle. I always never say his name, and I should start doing that. His name is Mano. And uncle would bring me over to his place, and he would whip out all these laser discs and vinyl of Whitney Houston. For some reason, Kenny G, also a lot of Kenny G, Enya, AC/DC. Um, it's just a lot of really cool artists, and he would introduce me to this whole other world that I did not grow up with. And then there was a period where my dad kind of gave up on me because I was just constantly rebelling, and he kind of left me to live with my grandmother, and she lives in Tanjong Pagar, so also it was a different cultural experience because up till that point it was a lot of Tamil movies as well, and that was playing in the background. And then I lived with my grandmother, and she only watched Chinese opera in Teochew, but she had MTV in her cable channels thing. So I then started just soaking in all that information of who is Cyndi Lauper, Sinead O'Connor. I started discovering Dolly Parton and just across genres, Moby. Just fell in love with music videos. And I was also like a really fat kid. So whenever my parents would take us shopping, instead of clothes, I would go to the movie store, and I would just memorize all the movie titles and memorize the actors in these movie titles and then the directors. And then through the years, I started just watching it, just studying all these different films. Yeah. So everything just kind of all gelled together as this whole world that I want to be a part of.
So we started early from MTV, and I too remember the joy of MTV and just watching all the music videos. And I think the best part about the internet was the ability to download more music videos
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
watch them again and again. Obviously, earning them to your own CD players.
I was that guy. I was that guy who would always walk around, and this was, I think, in by then it would have been secondary school. So I was like 15, and I would have like a giant bag of CDs, and I probably still have it in like I have this one cupboard where I throw everything that meant something to me in the past. So I just squeeze it in, shut the door, and never open that until like I'm like 60 or something. Then I'll open it. But I'm pretty sure I still have that large collection of CDs, a mixture of stuff that I bought, but also stuff that I burned into CDs. Because I used to make mixtapes for my teacher, like Teacher's Day, I'll make you a mixtape. And I would do that for my friends as well. And I'll always be the DJ at like school events. Or I think there was like this one day, I'm not sure if it was Teacher's Day or Valentine's Day or something like that, where they got me to go down to the principal's office, use the PA system, and I would just do song dedications and play songs for people. And this is something I only recently remember doing. Maybe my love for radio and like kind of also stemmed from, or there was a little bit of that hint in the past.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so funny because obviously I never got to the point where I was doing multiple mixtapes. I just made one for myself with my personal favorites. But I'm so curious about you and saying, okay, this is something I enjoy, I'm interested in to, hey, I actually want to focus on it and try to see I can make this more professional, right? So how was that transition for you?
So that was also accidental. What happened was I developed a love for screenwriting. I was downloading all these PDFs of film scripts like Pulp Fiction and memorizing them, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, because part of me wanted to be an actor, but I also loved a good script. So I wanted to go to film school. So I joined Neon Poly for the School of Film and Media Studies, film, sound, and video course. Quite a mouthful. And I studied film. And I remember I had a friend, Justin, who was in mass comm. He was struggling with a radio assignment where he had to like write a script for when he turns on the mic and they're like, "Hi, I'm Justin. That was Britney Spears." Like do like a whole talk set. And to me, I thought that was like the easiest thing because I remember watching, I think at that point it was like Beauty Shop or one of those barbershop movies, right? And there were scenes of a radio DJ like, "Hey, it's Angie, and waking up in the morning to Angie. That's right, I'm gonna play you some Tupac." So like I remember all these like lines, and I started like writing it for him in that voice, and I just helped him to do his radio assignments because to me it just felt like a movie scene, and I was channeling a bit of Wendy Williams as well, and he then invited me to just like hang out with him in the radio Conti, the studio after class. And I was just same thing. I was just pretending to be a radio presenter. The teacher was actually listening right next door because he can just with a push of a button hear what's going on in the studio itself. And he approached me and he said, "Hey, you should consider joining the radio CCA." And I thought it was exclusive to mass comm students. I was just going to do film. And I said yes. The radio studio in Neon Poly just became a second home for me where if I didn't do good in class, I would run to the studio and there would always be someone there, someone to just hang out with, drink bubble tea with. And I know I'm giving you a whole grandfather story, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. What happened was after I graduated and after I served 2 years in the military doing film, my teacher, who had then left Neon, reached out to me saying, "Hey, you should actually consider doing radio full time because I saw something in you and Singapore Press Holdings is actually looking for a DJ. You should maybe send in a demo," which I did. I recorded it, not this fancy a setup. I just recorded it straight into my MacBook with GarageBand. And then they called me and then they said, "Hey, you have a job and we also want you to do film stuff. And we also want you to do social media stuff. We want you to do a little bit of everything." So that was kind of how it started about 10 years ago. Now I've been doing radio for about 10 years now.
Crazy. Wow, 10 years of radio experience. It's interesting because here you have this long-standing interest in entertainment, music, and then this is how you fell into radio. And so you must have had all these like concepts about what radio is like
Yep.
versus you actually joining the radio industry
Hmm.
and seeing it from the inside. So I would just love to hear like what's the difference between that outsider view versus the insider reality of being in the radio industry.
Yeah, I think that also applies to not just with how I was with the mic on, but who I was also when the mic was off, where for a large chunk of my life, I thought everything that I was learning from MTV, that Sex in the City showing me New York is how New York is in real life, where everything that I knew about the world, the TV was that window to it, including how I ought to sound, how I ought to behave, how I ought to respond to whatever life throws at me. It's always through sort of the cinematic lens of make it entertaining. So I was that at the start where just like the radio assignment that I was helping Justin with, I was pretending to be all these different characters and I had all these characters and since it made people laugh, I took it as okay, I'm doing something right. And I listened to what everyone told me is the way to do radio. And it took many years for me to unlearn a lot of these things. And like I would do something and not be proud of it and analyze too much. And I just, but you know what? I'm just going to turn on the mic and I'm just going to speak. And I'm just going to speak from my heart. And if I don't really know something, I'm going to admit that I don't know something because it was everything that was not taught to me. Before it was you have to know exactly what you want to say and make sure it's perfect. But it just didn't make sense to me that I was delivering that to people who were also people who didn't listen with perfect ears or anything like that. I'm just going to try to enjoy the whole process and I'm just going to just speak. I'm not going to be radio DJ above listener. We're kind of just going to be existing on the same plane and we're just going to chat so that we can all chat more, encourage each other to converse a little bit more, I think.
You're projecting this reality of humor, wit, suaveness, all these things versus like being more like on the level, right?
Mm.
What's the gap? Why do you think you were working so hard to project that looking back? Was there any particular reasons?
I think it was that line between me and everyone that I adored on screen. And I thought that line was like a moat. I thought it was this huge gap. It was the raised platform of the stage and me being in the audience. And I think that illusion is important because it's the theater of the mind. That allure happens when you forget that you're watching people and instead you see characters and then you get the story and everything. And I do see how that can be brilliant with creating art. But I think I've also started to pull away the curtain of Oz and be able to understand how things work behind the scenes as well. And I think that's something that I'm very proud of, where a lot of what I'm proud of with my work in radio or film or music has been the stuff behind the microphone, like with working the panels, with audio production, with understanding the mic setup, my love for editing. So I love editing videos. And it was one of my biggest strengths in film school as well. And I think the craft behind all that fascinates me a lot. Once I think I started embracing the more behind the scenes stuff instead of getting swept away with being on camera or existing only when the mic turned on, I just became a more grounded person. And then that carried over to how I delivered whatever I was talking about or I would be talking about.
I'm curious, do you feel like you lost listeners, air quotes, or slash N? What kind of new listeners did you gain from that transition from those characters and larger than life stuff to a more authentic self? Because there are gains, right? And there are also losses. I'm just curious if you could share what you saw from the audience.
Well, I don't really have like actual statistics of that. I'm pretty sure I lost a lot of people along the way when I stopped doing a bunch of characters that I would have as recurring segments on the show. And they were fun, it made people laugh. But it's also a realization that as much as I adore these characters that I created, and it's a different kind of skill set, I found myself leaning towards these characters like a float in the water where when I get a chance to interview someone, I'm too afraid to think of insightful questions. I'm too afraid to be Josh because Josh is always having a panic attack and always has social anxiety. I would lean on all these characters, including a drag version of myself, where it's this hyper confident, larger than life, flamboyant, charismatic person when really I actually feel like most of the time a very, very small person. So I would lean on to all these characters, and I found myself actually doing that with each opportunity that I'm given. I'm like, can I do this character here? And I'll do this character here for that bit. And I was so afraid to just be myself and ask myself, how would I do the show if it was just Josh? I started gaining different kind of followers as well, where it wasn't just that made me laugh. Oh my gosh, that was brilliant. Can you bring that character back? I listened and I laughed with my whole family. All that is really sweet, and I'm grateful for that. But I also got a lot of, after that, actual questions about life and people sharing with me what they're going through. And the topics that I discuss in the show started to change as well. Those are now the feedback tidbits and anecdotes that I feel the most proud of because now it's like what I'm talking about, like human to human, we're actually like conversing and I feel like I'm actually adding to someone's life rather than just giving them a reaction to laugh, which is also great. It's just that I've started to discover other aspects of it.
Yeah, wow, that's really powerful. I mean, really, I think the whole point around the characters really obviously being your superpowers and getting you to a certain space and level, but also them becoming floats over time. And I think it's not just you who's obviously doing them as part of these bits and sketches, but also it's something that's very real for so many people. Because I think a lot of people have this outer shell of who they are. The character that they're doing is confident business professional who knows what's going on versus who they actually are. And it's really about that mask and the true self. As you started reconciling, at least on the professional front, and being more of your authentic self, did you feel healthier or better? Because that's why you're kind of implying a little bit, right? You started growing into it. But I'm just kind of curious to like, did you, as you did more of it intentionally, did it snowball in like your, I don't know, how you approach your professional life and everything else?
Mm. It wasn't something that like I put my foot down one day and decided this is how I'm going to start doing work and this is how I'm going to do the show. I think it was a gradual thing for me where I was living my life and I was dating people and I was experiencing experiencing all these different things, and I was also consuming a lot of things. I was also regurgitating a lot of things that I learned from the past that just didn't work. So I was living my life and going through all that, and I was starting to shift as a person. Then it also affected the show and what I would then feel from a good show, what I would consider a good show, I would then take into my life where this is how I'm gonna be more. That worked. I'm gonna do that more. So it's been a nice little squash match between me and the wall, I think.
And in this squash match over time, what's been interesting is that you've also not only been a DJ on radio, you also start doing more music of your own as an independent artist. And then you also eventually do a podcast, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because you're a voice on the platform, a great voice on a great platform. And then now you're kind of moving to become a great voice on your own. And then eventually kind of like you're a voice that kind of like sticks out within Southeast Asia as well. So I'm just kind of curious, how did your creative career kind of like arc with that decision to become more authentic to your true self?
Well, with the podcast, with the SG Boys podcast, that was an interesting one because it also once again stemmed from not having something. The rules in mainstream media here in Singapore is that with free to air programming, there cannot be any positive portrayals of LGBTQ plus people. So this is years and years of censoring myself and being okay with that because this is a job, this is the platform, this is what it takes, then okay. I won't use the pronouns of who that is accurate for, say, I went on a date last night. I have to keep saying I went on a date and then my date did this and then I responded by this. I cannot use he him, right? For this person. I can't give that away, unfortunately. And I was okay with doing that dance for a while or just completely avoiding anything to do about relationships or talk about marriage or the future. I just would not try to engage in these kind of conversations on radio because it would go down that route and I would just focus on entertainment news and stuff. And then in 2019, I had an opportunity to do a TED Talk. This was something that meant the world to me because TED Talks at that point had been very beneficial for my growth. I was healing from a breakup that absolutely destroyed me. It also was going to be about my coming out experience. I have a very, very unique coming out story. And the night before the TEDx was supposed to happen, they called me and they wanted me to remove my coming out story and they wanted me to change the pronouns to girlfriend instead of boyfriend, which was just like another like once more I'm doing this, right? And I think that for me was the last straw because I felt like with the rules of radio and TV and newspapers, I've learned to just accept it as this is what the regulations are and maybe my role is for something else on these platforms, and that's okay. I didn't view TED Talks like that. And obviously, TED Talks are not like that. But because it's a TEDx, it's organized by students in this case. I didn't see it coming. And I thought, okay, I can be completely myself, completely vulnerable, completely honest, and share a part of myself that I haven't been able to share elsewhere. So because of that, I decided to pull out from the TEDx because I didn't also want that to be my first TED Talk memory. I just couldn't do that to myself or to my story. So I decided to pull out. That became a big national thing where now my sexuality is being discussed openly by complete strangers. And it was very overwhelming. On one part, I'm grateful that that conversation of censorship was continuing, not just in Singapore, but in Malaysia as well, where another student was pulled from a TED Talk as well. But on a personal level, it was very overwhelming because it was very close to when I had just come out to my family. And now my family had to sort of deal with the repercussions of that and how it affects their careers. And I pulled away from any kind of discussion on that matter for a while until 2020, a year later, last year, when we were in our mini lockdown in Singapore. I felt quite purposeless at home. I thought to myself, like, what's next, right? I had just watched Queer Eye at that point, and I was like, I want to be on Queer Eye. but Netflix is not gonna green like that. Not right now, I think. And I can't really do it on my own because it's gonna cost a lot to renovate someone's home on my own. So I thought, why don't I try to do a audio version of Queer Eye, where it's a bunch of gay men with a microphone talking about life, what it was like going to the army, talk about loneliness, talk about dating. We never have to hide the pronouns thing anymore. We can explore all these different nuances with our lives and share stories as well at our own time. And I was like, okay, this is the thing I'm gonna do. So that was how this whole podcast thing started. It came from years and years of not speaking out, or not, I guess, being okay with not speaking out, and being conditioned to treat my story as something of shame, and the story that you only tell to a couple of people after you've hung out with them enough to trust them, and being okay to just turn on the mic and, this is my story, I own it, and I want to hear yours, and I celebrate mine, and I want to celebrate yours, and we tell it together. Gradual, everything is very gradual, everything is connected for me in my life.
Okay, so what's interesting is that you're going through this process and you talk about how you had just recently come out to your family. And I think early on you mentioned that your dad was a pastor. So that was one heck of a conversation it must have been.
Yeah. Do you want me to give you like the rundown of what happened?
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I actually talked about it on the SG Boys podcast, season 2, episode 1, the coming out story. And it's not just my story. You hear my co-hosts as well, Kennedy and Sam Joe, come out on the podcast and share their coming out story of what happened when they came out to their friends and family members, as well as themselves. My story was the day that I had that big breakup, which completely shattered me, was the same day my dad told me that someone in church was blackmailing him and telling all the different colleagues in his work that I'm gay through a letter, an anonymous letter. So that was how my dad found out I'm gay, and that's how the entire church found out I'm gay. And it was sort of a reason for him to leave the church and not be in the running to be the head pastor of the church.
Whoa.
Same day, my breakup happened. My dad tells me, let's go for brunch. We need to talk. That also was the same day, I guess, I had to deal with that with my mom and my sisters. It wasn't fun. It wasn't terrible, thank God. And I'm very grateful for that, because it was, by the hours, it started being beautiful. And I never connected to my mom and dad like that before. It was a lot of crying in public because we were in a Chinese restaurant at Ion, top floor. It was beautiful because I was also probably the most vulnerable I'd ever been with my family. But it also was not the end of that story. And we talk about this on this podcast as well, where in a strange way, coming out isn't sort of a one time thing, or at least by my experience and a few other people that I've spoken to. Coming out has been also a gradual thing, where you come out one time and then you have to come out by educating them with what you're coming out as. Because very often people have a very warped, often artificial, or sometimes negative perception of what you're coming out as. And then you also have to remind them that you're still out, and that this is a real thing, and it isn't just like, hey, I have a flu and it's gonna go away. Once I just take a bunch of meds, I'm fine for the rest of my life. It's like a constant, like, this is actually real. This is my boyfriend. And I'm still in that place with my mom and dad.
Wow. That's deep and that's raw. That must have been one hell of a meal for you and also everybody else in the restaurant, I guess.
It was very overpriced. We barely ate. Very, very overpriced.
It sounds like there was a huge element of grief actually that you had during this process.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. The past couple of years have been really, really intense. Or I haven't really allowed myself a moment to really experience every fiber of those emotions. I think the breakup and the family situation, the coming out story, the TED Talk thing, everything kind of happened really fast. And I was in therapy and I was doing everything I can to get better. And I am 100% happier than I've ever been. I feel. I feel. Like I've been very, very happy. I feel good. I wake up each morning now with my affirmations, but not like before where I would wake up thinking that whatever I was dreaming happened the night before because I was struggling with PTSD. So every morning was really tough. I always have to have an audiobook playing so that I would wake up to the sound of Oprah Winfrey or Eckhart Tolle or Brene Brown to just calm me down and say everything is okay. So that was tough for a period of time. It was really intense. And then now I'm able to go for walks. I'm able to eat right. I'm able to exercise. I'm able to have conversations and stand up straight. And I'm in a relationship right now and I'm very, very happy. And I don't ever want to take it for granted.
There's no point, right? Because we're just reflecting about the grief process, which is less of take away a moral of the story and more of an experience and journey.
So even though I have been consistently happy, which is a great achievement for me, who's also a Gemini, I lost my boss recently, who is the man who gave me my job, who consistently would check in on my radio show and be really hard on me. And at the same time, my biggest cheerleader with my job, because he's the only person who really understands. Because he started off as a radio DJ in Australia as well at around my age, loves music, huge nerd, and then became a program director. Gave me my job. He was the one that said, we're going to take a chance on that kid because I was the youngest at that point in the station. And everyone were like big names. And it was like, let's get that kid to interview Katy Perry. And he did a great job. And we're going to keep sending him all around the world to all these places that I thought I would never get to go to in my lifetime. And I lost him. And I also lost my aunt, who was the first person in my family that I actually came out to at my own timing before the whole TED Talk thing. And she passed away really recently. So I feel for the past year and a half, I've been consistently happy. I've been consistently good. I've been healing, but I've also been experiencing all these other things. And I have just been sort of conditioning myself to just be happy a little bit longer because I was so unhappy for so much of my life before that. So it's like I don't know, maybe at some point I just need a good cry. But yeah, that was my point, I think.
Good cry. Always recommend it. 5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't want to go into it, but when you need it, it's a good one.
Sometimes I actively seek out movies to make me cry. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not there yet. But I do tear up sometimes at cinemas. I think this is a catharsis from the emotion of some movies.
Yeah, it actually takes a lot to make me cry. I get to that point where I will choke up till like my throat gets really tight and I can't really breathe very well. It reaches that point, but when it actually goes and I start crying, that's a bit harder. But only a few movies have and experiences in my life has taken me to that spot, I think.
Well, it's been interesting because you've really transformed that grief into a lot of energy as a founder of a podcast, as someone in pouring into your creative energies as well. And I think one thing I really appreciated was that you've always been someone who has been really at the intersection of not just your personal story and not just obviously your professional career as a DJ, but also very much in new media. So in this case, podcasting, pop culture, YouTube, and even I guess the online debate about the TEDx talk and the dynamics around it. So I'm just kind of curious, how do you feel technology has opened up the space for different conversations that could be had in the past?
Great question. There was a big period of time where I was afraid of social media and technology and I resisted it and I was leaving Instagram all the time and taking social media breaks all the time, which can be very healthy. I've done it and they have been very beneficial for when I was in that place. But I've also learned little tips where instead of fighting with technology and with social media and stuff, I've started to embrace it and find that space where you do fit in. Because I'll use Instagram, for example, where we follow a mixture of celebrities, your friends, people you've hung out with and you followed just because it was a polite thing to do, people you look up to. Maybe for me, I also follow a bunch of like really nerdy stuff like DC Comics and like video game companies and stuff. So I get like a mixture of all these different things. And I'm like, as I'm scrolling through my feed, my head is just taking in everything, often also at my expense. Oh my gosh, I'm so poor, I can't afford that house, or I wish I was slimmer, or whoa, they're doing all these really cool things and going to all these really cool places, and I wish I could go. And there are all these things at my expense. So there was a period of time where social media was really tough. And then I thought I had to constantly share everything about my life. Just because one person says, whoa, that meant something to me, that meant I need to continue sharing everything. But I would, at the end of it, feel really naked and had to remind myself that maybe sometimes it's good to save as draft. And I started journaling more and keeping the journal entries to myself. And I also started to reconfigure my social media as well, where I would unfollow people that, no offense, nothing personal. I just unfollowed a bunch of accounts that made me feel a particular way. And it's not about them, it's just how I perceive things. And I just learned to just understand and accept that, okay, right now I'm perceiving this as this, and I just need to back away for a bit, or I need to mute this account for a while. And I start following a whole bunch of other accounts. I start following like tattoo artists. I start following photographers who photograph these wonderful places around the world, or they photograph Tokyo in a whole different world. And now my feed becomes completely different. And when I go on Instagram, it's very, very healthy. And I also follow a lot of activists as well, a lot of really nice motivational accounts. And it was very, very different content from what I had just a couple of years prior. So social media has changed for me. The experience on social media, I just joined a gamers Facebook group of gay nerds just geeking out about like Mortal Kombat and Final Fantasy. And it's just like, it's such a wonderful community. On Facebook, I'm part of a Out in SG Facebook group. Shout out to Tim Birch, who runs that Facebook group in Singapore. There's also Out in HK in Hong Kong. Different little out in groups around Asia, and they organize cooking classes, going cycling together, really healthy social activity in the LGBTQ plus community, which also for a very long period of time, it wasn't that case, where the only time I'd sort of meet someone who is like me is at a gay bar, at a gay club, or if I'm hooking up with them or on a date with them. It's never been just like, oh, we're just going to go for a pottery class together. So social media has just been really, really interesting, and how drastically your experience on social media can change just by clicking a bunch of things and clicking a bunch of other things and reconfiguring what your feed looks like. And I think finally with podcasts, for many years in the 80s, 90s especially, and growing up in the 90s, auditioning for stuff, it was a lot of, you have to fight for that microphone to be in front of you. You have to give people like a big reason, and you have to get through second, third audition just to get the job to have a microphone in front of you. My boyfriend got me this mic. I think it's the best mic that I've ever used. And it's beautiful. And it's got like this old school 50s look to it. And we do our own podcast. And I learned how to figure out how to upload a podcast onto Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everything. I've learned how to measure my metrics and figure out my own rates. I learned to produce the show. And I've taken a lot of the skill sets that I've learned from film school to editing the podcasts. And I'm still learning how to use a compressor, graphic equalizer, and all these different things, normalize the audio. It's been really hands-on. And I've also, I think, ultimately, with the power of doing things at your own pace, time, and platform, building your own platform, I've also sort of been learning the responsibility of what that is. And we have these conversations with the SG Boys podcast, especially, where we ask ourselves, is it time to do this story? Do we have the right people, the right resources for this story to come out in this format? Let's think about our audience. What can we give them today? What do they need? We become the bosses of that in a very like authority kind of way, where it's just more of, it's our responsibility to give them something really good because they're going to listen to this on the train tomorrow or at the gym. Let's entertain them, but also let's have them thinking a little bit.
Wow, that's a lot. Because, obviously we're talking about almostly from an individual to community to a pouring out dynamic, which is talking about how to be digitally healthy on your terms. And the secondly, obviously, is the discovery and community that you're getting. And the third is, responsibility to your listeners and the people that choose to listen. When you think about that responsibility, it's interesting because you're exploring this new medium called the podcast medium that lets you have your own voice and build it in a different format. What has, over the past year, has been some myths or misconceptions about podcasting SG Boys?
Myths. Ooh. I don't know if I've actually thought about myths or misconceptions about podcasts because podcasts for me have been just really interesting because I think for me with radio and with how radio works or the format of it in Asia at least is in, out, fast. You come in out of the song that was Britney Spears with Toxic off her In the Zone record. It's Joshua Simon on radio station. Coming up, we have A to Z. And real quick, I want to give a big shout out to this company, bum, 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 In, Out, Fast, right? Then I started listening to radio stations in New York and I started listening to podcasts like the Oprah Super Soul Sunday conversations and stuff. And those were really, really helpful to me. And then, oh my goodness, all my favorite celebrities have podcasts now. So I'm listening to like Anna Faris podcast, RuPaul's Drag Race, all these different podcasters as well. I listen to like Sadhguru. I listen to like a little bit of everything. I listen to like the Hollywood Reporter and they do a lot of interview podcasts and stuff. Sort of my answer to that is everything has just been, whoa, I didn't know you could do that in a podcast. I didn't know you could do like a commercial midway through. And coming up, we're going to talk about this. But first, Squarespace. We all need a good website. A website completely changes everything for you. Like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Or you can do like horror stories on a podcast. And actually, today Faye Hollow comes out. This is a podcast series that I'm doing voice acting on. It's from AXN. It's AXN's first crime thriller podcast. And this is like a full soundscape audio experience. It's like you're listening to an audiobook with sound effects and music in the background. And Lim K Tong is in it. It's got an international cast, and I play a villain in this one as well. So already I'm discovering all these really different ways of how a podcast episode can be. I have friends who do podcasts as well, and they're very raw. They don't edit anything. They they talk about whatever they want, and then there are some that's really curated and really intense, like the Aware Saga podcast. Whoa, that was quite a trip. So I don't know if there are any myths I would say that I can point out because I'm still kind of discovering things as it's going on. I think the only myth for our podcast is that it's record and upload. We actually go through a lot of meetings for every single episode. We send it to everyone in the team, in the SG Boys to listen. Rachel, Rachel, she set this up. So she joined the SG Boys as an ally. She said, I'm a friend of yours, but I'm also an ally and I want to do something. So let me do comms for you for free. I'll organize the interviews for you. I will handle the press stuff for you. I'll go through the descriptions for every single episode. I do the episode artwork as well. So all these other aspects of just what happens, all the gears that needs to move for an episode to come out for our show. There's a lot that goes into it. And we fact check a lot of the things that are said in the podcast as well. And we think, okay, let's not put this in there because we can't actually back this up. So we're going to take this out. So there's a lot of work for that part because a lot of people think it's just like, and then like upload. For our show, it's not like that.
Well, that's amazing. I definitely agree. There's a lot more that goes to the podcast, including this one, than just recording, upload.
Yeah.
I also do actually appreciate the fact that the benefit of not having any co-hosts on my side is I have no meetings. Also, I think I have a different take, right? And you're putting yourself to a higher bar, actually holding yourself to a higher standard than I am as well. So I think it's really interesting to actually hear that process on the back end. So, wrapping up here, you've obviously shared quite a few moments where you've been brave. I'm just wondering, in all those moments, would you consider those moments to have been the moments where you chose to be brave? And if so, what parts of bravery did it illuminate for you?
Many of us think bravery is not feeling anything and having whatever life throws at you just go over your head. The bravest moments of my life were when I was the most broken, the absolutely most broken periods. And also, the incredible thing is, each time I was on the ground, I was never dead. I was never, I don't know if dead is the word. Something would kick in me each time. Every time I was at that point where I was broken, there would still be something in me that would say, go do that. Now go put that song on. Go into that bathtub and just stay there for a while. There were still those moments. I started really loving podcasts when I was really broken because I was feeling all these things. And all I did was go to Google and type what I was feeling, and a YouTube video would come up, which is usually a TED talk about someone giving a talk about what this is. Like the grieving process, for example, right? So I would type how I'm feeling, and then you would see a TED talk come up, and then I would click that, and then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to follow this person's podcast who gave that talk, and then I started listening to them. The most broken periods of my life were when I was the most brave, when I was the most vulnerable, when I had grown a lot from as well. Yeah, brave for me has never been, I don't feel anything. Brave for me has never been, I'm going to break your heart and be like, oh, okay, go ahead. Oh, that was a wonderful interview. And that was it. It was, this might go a completely different direction. Yeah, there's one big interview that I did with Hugh Jackman that now has like 1 million views. But it's a funny story because I almost missed that flight. Actually missed my flight to that interview to Sydney because I got the date wrong. It was like Friday, 2 a.m. So in my mind, on Friday, I have to go to the airport at night to make it for the 2 a.m. flight. I know it's so stupid. So essentially, I showed up at work on Friday when my flight was on Thursday night, Friday morning. So I missed that flight, but my interview was on Saturday. So I managed to get another flight, fly straight into Sydney with 0 hours of sleep, and did everything I could to just stay together and not give up. That became my most popular interview of everything that I'd done. And you may not be able to tell that I was completely sleep deprived and just riddled with anxiety. I'm very proud of that day when I was able to just say, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to show up and I'm going to do great. And I'm not going to waste these people's time. I'm not going to waste the person who's watching this YouTube video their time. I'm going to do a good interview for them, and then I'll take care of myself later. I'll go and sleep later. Yeah. Sorry to go off on like the super long. I feel like I'm going to be one of those, I don't know if I ever have kids, but I might be one of those like old grandfathers with a rocking chair. And just, oh, it reminds me of this story back in my day.
Well, the truth is, all the grandkids love those stories and they always hang out all the time. So I think the stories will be well received. Well, thank you so much, Joshua. I'd love to wrap up with, paraphrasing the three big themes that came up for me. I think the first, of course, was, your personal journey and your love for entertainment. I love to hear different parts of it along the way, from you as a kid looking at MTV at your grandparents' place, all the way to burning your own CDs, all the way down to your first big break with your mentor, to the in and out nature of the industry. And it's so interesting to see that personal journey because it's not just a professional journey, but it's also a growth journey in both skills and expertise. And it's nice for us to, for a moment, have that small window into what your professional routines on a day-to-day basis, which is so enjoyable. Obviously, the second part is huge as well. And obviously, thank you so much for sharing about your personal story as well in terms of your growth journey, from coming out to being who you are, to staying true to your story in spite of X, but also accommodating Y. And I think that's amazing that you've done there. And I think lastly, of course, is thank you so much for sharing about the dynamic around bravery and still feeling it all. That's a tough one. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, not just in the past and overcoming that with your bravery, but also being vulnerable and sharing that with everybody today, so that hopefully provides, like you said, not you being a grandfather, but a beloved grandfather with all of us listening to your grandfather stories now.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Absolutely. I hope I have earned the pleasure of your time.
Yes, you have. And I hope I've earned the pleasure of your time as well. Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. Stay well and stay brave.